You on this day, first of all, give honor to the living one, to Pastor Umi K, who's getting her rest that is well deserved. I want to thank Brother Rasco for stepping in to be the tech person. Chief, thank you for being ready to sing on the spot. Reverend Angela, thank you for your being a liturgist and also your kind words to me and about me. The service topic for today is liberation love. Let me say, first of all, also thank you for praying for my family, my grandson in particular. You may receive the note that it was just a few weeks ago that I had the honor of marrying he and my granddaughter in marriage, Latanya. And then on the 26th, it seems to be the case of last month, one of his best men who was at the wedding died tragically along with four others in a car accident on their way to a funeral. So a lot of heaviness, of course, around that. My grandson and his friends are on their way back to Atlanta, so we pray for them as they are now making their journey. And I'll say, I guess, more as I incorporate this into this topic. Also, let's have Sister Crystal, who is in the hospital, but who's online right now in our prayers. Anyone else who needs special prayers, we lift you up at this moment. The scriptural passage for today is one that's very familiar in many respects. It's from Matthew chapter 22, verses 36 through 40 is what I've highlighted. I'll go ahead and read this in English and then want to talk about this. It says, "Teacher, which commandment is the greatest in the law?" He said unto him, "You will love the Lord your God with all of your heart, and all of your soul, and all of your mind. This is the great and first commandment." And he went on. "The second, moreover, is like it. You will love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments, all of the law and the prophets hang," or all of the law and the prophets really hinge upon these two commandments: loving the Lord your God and loving your neighbor as yourself. Now, beloved, I want to read this again differently because I don't think that the English translation as we have received it gives us a full and powerful impact as if we were translated back into the Greek and then into the Hebrew. So I'm going to read it in the Hebrew, translate it back into Hebrew, and then I want you to really just hear and feel and sense the difference in what this opens up and how this will be connected with the theme of liberation love, liberation love. Also bearing in mind that this passage here in part is taken from Deuteronomy 6 and 5, when the Hebrew/Israelites were in a process of being liberated. So in the translated back into the Hebrew, verses 37 and 39 would sound more like this. "Vayoma elav v'ahavta," it the living one, Elohecha, b'kol levavcha, uvchol nafshecha, uvchol madaecha. And verse 39, "V'hashenit dorma lach, v'ahavta lereacha kamocha." And he, Yeshua, said to them, as his brothers who are asking questions, "You shall cleave, or you shall hug," H-U-G, "you shall hug the living one, your strong one, the one who gives you strength, with all of the inner parts of yourself and all of your life force, and all of your deep thoughts. Let me say that again. You shall hug, embrace the living one, your strong one, with all of your inner parts, with all of your life force, and with all of your deep thoughts. And then verse 39. And the second commandment is like this one. You shall hug, cleave, embrace the one near you as you hug and embrace yourself. I want everyone to say the word hug. Hug, H-U-G, hug. And I want you to hug yourself. Right where you are, hug yourself. Now, contrary to what is usually presented as a kind of abstract, universal, and in some ways it could be detached idea. In these two verses, Yeshua is inviting his brothers. I want to come back to that. He's inviting his brothers to hear a commandment from Deuteronomy 6:5 and a midrash that he adds to it from a different point of view. When he says to them, the greatest teaching, because the word is really not commandment either. Torah does not mean commandment. It means teaching. The teaching based on cause and effect, on observation. If you do this, this will happen. If you do this, this will come back to you. The greatest teaching of observation is that you shall love the one whose very name means living. It's not God. It's not Lord. That's the English translation. But the word actually is, it will be. I.e., you should hug and cleave onto livingness and the living one, who is also our strong one, the one who makes all things possible, the one who is the source of life and who's also the source that sustains life, and is also the power and presence that goes beyond any particular incarnation. Love and hug and embrace that one. How? With every aspect of your inner feelings. The word heart is a mistranslation because it's not just the heart. The ancients thought of the heart, what we call the heart, and the inner parts as the seat of consciousness, as the seat of feeling, as the seat of emotion, as the seat of righteousness and justice. This is why our ancient Kemetic ancestors embalmed and put those parts inside of canopies and disposed of the brain. It's here in this lower brain, in the abdominal region, that they could feel and sense and emote what was just and what was right, what was palpable. So love the living one in your guts, in your guts. And love the living one with all of your nephesh. You see, in Genesis chapter 2, the nephesh is what the living Elohim breathed into the nostrils of Adam, the male and female being that has been shaped and formed from Adamah, Mother Earth, together but yet to be separated or distinguished. The living Elohim breathed the nefesh chayat. That's the life force, that which animates, that which inspires, that which it motivates, that takes us to the highest height and the deepest depth of reality. Love the living one with all of the life force that has been given to you. And love the living one, not with your mind or your intellect, as that could connote in the Latin and in the English and in the Germanic idea, but with your deep thought, your dreams, your aspirations, your hopes, your desires, your plans, your ruminations. In fact, here again, the Hebrew word for deep thoughts is from the same Hebrew word that connotes intimate knowledge of something or someone. Da'at. Not distracted is connected. Yeshua is saying something else. We could say that Yeshua is saying, love the living one and life itself with all of your body, all of your soul, and all of your spirit. The three parts of what constitutes a human being in the image of the creative powers, individually and collectively, male and female. That's the greatest law, is to love living, love livingness, cleave, hold, embrace, and hug life and livingness. Then he says, this is his midrash, because you can't find it in Deuteronomy chapter 6 exactly the same way. His midrash, as the rabbi, he says, then the second one that I'm giving to you essentially is like the first one. Love your neighbor that's near you as you love yourself. Now you got to hear this, beloved, because this is something you can miss if you're not paying attention. He doesn't say love your neighbor better than you love yourself. He doesn't say love your neighbor more than you love yourself. He doesn't say try to make your neighbor love you. He says the same way that you have learned to love yourself. And all of your inner parts. Love yourself in all of your life force, and love yourself in all of your deepest thoughts. First, love yourself. First, embrace yourself. First, hug yourself. And the same way that you love the living one, and the same way you transfer that power into loving yourself, then love your neighbor the same way. Love those near you the same way. See, the cyclical nature of this can't be really heard in the English, but it's felt in the poetry of the Hebrew. It's not a paradox. No, 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 no. Yeshua is saying it's a continuity, because when you really love life, and when you really love living, and you really love and hug and embrace the living one with all of your guts and with all of your life force and with all of your deepest thoughts, then so too you'll know how to love your neighbor as you love yourself.
Oh, this thing is
Loving
blessing me,
yourself
Papa.
first.
It's blessing me. I'm sorry. I didn't mean
No,
to
no, no,
say
speak
but
up. It's
this thing
okay.
is blessing me.
Let me take this to another level. When you read chapter 22 of Matthew, there's a tendency, because we're reading in the eyes of Constantine and the Roman Empire, to think that there's a fight going on between Yeshua and the Pharisees and the scribes and the Herodians and the Sadducees. But beloved, I want you to go back and read chapter 2, and I want you to read it from a different point of view, because we've been given some lies up in here about what that is going on in these parables and in this contestation. First and foremost, Yeshua loves his brothers because he knows what we have forgotten, which is this. They were all being oppressed by the Roman Empire. And in the midst of this oppression through the Roman Empire, they're struggling to love. This is Martin Luther King before his time, strength to love. And each segment of chapter 22 bears this out when you realize that the overarching canopy in which Jesus and his brothers are struggling in this instance is that of domination by the Romans. So when you read again verses 1 through 14 about the marriage feast, you might want to bear in mind as an allegory about how the Romans would take siege of Jerusalem and kill and throw brothers and sisters into exile. Yeshua puts irony in his poetry when he says the kingdom of the living one is like a pater familias, a landowner who does this and that, invites people to a feast, and yet at the same time has a particular type of attitude towards those who don't do what he wants them to do. In the second episode, verses 15 to 22, likewise, when the brothers are asking Yeshua about that corn, about taxes, yes, some of them are scheming and conniving, but some of them also want to know, what do we do when we are a client state of the Romans? And we must pay tribute to them so they won't burn us, torture us, beat us, rape us, exile us. And Yeshua says, look at the image on it. Bring me a corner and let's look at the image. The image is that of Caesar. It came from Caesar. You got to give it back to Caesar. If something doesn't come from you, but comes from someplace else, you got to give it back to where it came from eventually. Maybe Yeshua is saying, brothers, sisters, as well. As a client state, we always are obligated to the other. But if we can shape our own, if we love enough to shape our own, then we give back to our own. The third episode, verses 22 to 33, about marriage. When they ask him, well, a man dies, they don't have any children. He has 6 other brothers, and each of them, according to Moses, married his sister. And none of them have any children. Who would she belong to? I want you to hear that. Who would she belong to in the kingdom? And Yeshua says, you think about this the wrong way. We're not talking about pater familias. We're not talking which man's going to own her, because in the reign of justice and egalitarian equality, nobody owns anyone else. Get that out of your mind, that you own another person. That's the problem. And certainly that you're going to own a woman in this life and in the one to come. Just like some folks thought there was going to be a Negro heaven. Never forget, my father told on one occasion when I was a young boy, he said he heard this prominent preacher in Memphis, Tennessee, talking about when he gets to heaven, he's going to go to the colored folk side to hear them sing and dance. So number one, what makes him think he's going to heaven? Number two, why does he think that the living one would have the same attitude and the same situation in heaven that was on earth in Memphis, Tennessee in the 1960s and 70s, or in 70 AD in Jerusalem of Rome? Yeshua is saying, brothers, we need another model for our relationships with our sisters. In the fourth episode, the one we had before us, which in a way culminates everything else, they still are pursuing and trying to understand. I want you to hear this not just as hypocritical rhetoric, but as a definitive struggle between brothers in this instance who are Sadducees and who are Herodians and who are Pharisees and scribes, all of that. But they're trying to figure out how to be liberated. And Yeshua is saying it's going to take some liberation love in order to be liberated. Then that final episode, verses 41 through 46, they still pressing, they're still trying to get it. And they just want to know, well, you know, who was the son of David? Because David was the ideal Mashiach, the ideal anointed one. And they believed from the Psalms and from other writings that the anointed one would come through the lineage of David. And there were always suspicions about Jesus' own lineage, so there's a bit of rhetoric in here, a bit of signification in it, no doubt about it, but still. They should point them to the Psalms and say the one who demonstrates that he, in this instance, he has come to fulfill promises of righteousness, that he who has come on a donkey rather than a horse, that's the previous chapter 21, that the one who comes from the underside of history rather from the top side. The one that loves the humble, the sick, the brokenhearted, that one is fulfilling the promises of the Mashiach for the people. For the people. Loving with all of your guts. Loving, cleaving, hugging, embracing with all of your life force. And loving, cleaving, hugging, and embracing with your deepest and profoundest thoughts. That's love. Not in a Germanic sense, that word, but in the Hebrew sense of ahava, to grab hold to care enough, to snatch out of the way of harm and danger, to care enough, to speak the unspeakable even. I love my grandbaby, my grandson. He moved here a few years ago and he called me. He'd been here already, but he came back. He said, Granddaddy, he said, I want to move back to Atlanta so I can be around you. And he did. And so did his future spouse. They both did. And when he wanted to get married, and they wanted to get married, she wanted to marry him, she let him marry him, say it that way. They asked me to perform the marriage ceremony, and so I did. The 8th of last month. And let me say something, beloved. I get sick and tired of documentaries and movies and miniseries about gangsters and talk about big time entertainers or big time sports person, because I would so much love to hear and see a documentary about the thousands of African American men intergenerationally who live simple but righteous and powerful lives in this desert. When I married my grandson, I watched 5 young men. Well, not just them. I watched young men and women. I was witness to how they love each other. They're not Christians. Hear me? They're not Muslims. They're not Esuyemi Ifayemi. They don't even give themselves a name. They just spiritual. They don't belong to any organized anything as such. But I watched those young men in particular, his 4 best men, who had driven from Atlanta to Memphis to participate in their wedding, and the young women who also showed up. And I watched them participate in the ritual. And I watched them celebrate and pour libations afterwards. And I watched and participate in them, several of them driving back, including the one to whom this is dedicated, drive back from Memphis to Atlanta until they knew they were all safe in a convoy that included the old man, me. And I said, that's something right there. That needs to be a movie. That needs to be a documentary. That needs to be talking points right there. But it's not. I think I said this earlier. Let me reiterate this. Talking about love. Young Jordan Jermaine Calicut, and 3 others gave their lives on Wednesday, May 26th, around 2:00 in the morning, on their way to eulogize a sister they loved who had lost her life. That's love. My grandson and his companions now on their way back to Atlanta. I've been in touch with him all along the way, both of them, my babies, praying with them, laying hands on them before they left, talking with them along the way as they grieve, to be sure. But also, as they are expressing a type of fortitude that is extraordinary. When I spoke with him on yesterday, after the eulogy, I said, baby, what you doing? He said, Granddad, we have celebrated Jordan. We poured libations. We're going to go take a tour of the city where they both were citizens, quote unquote, as that goes. And he said, then we're going to head back to Atlanta. Our babies, for all their foibles, got something that's deep and profound. I was sitting in the car because we've been going several times now back and forth between here and Memphis for different reasons. I would listen to the music that he listens to, and I began to realize, I don't know if you do, but I began to realize it wasn't just rap they're listening to. It's listening to their scriptures of their lives. And among the others that I heard, he said, Granddad, this right here, this track, me and Jordan did this one. And Jordan and he had done a track on a revision of Road, Jordan Road, the spiritual rebooted. Liberation love, liberating love, with all that we got, and the exchange and reciprocity is the core of where we ought to be in fulfilling the next stage of our individual and collective present and future. In the midst of the grief that they no doubt feel, I am so proud of them for who they be. And I hope you feel the same way about our babies who are struggling and rejoicing to find love, to be loved, to know love, and to create a better future for themselves and for as long as we're here for us. And I pray to the Creator that when my time comes, these babies, all of them, will pour some libations for Granddaddy. Ashe, ashe, ashe. Amen, amen, amen.
Ashe.
Ayi Bobo.
Ashe,
Ayi Bobo.
Ashe,
Ayi Bobo.
Ashe,
Ashe.
Ashe.
Asheo.
Ashe.